The Dude Abides. The Big Lebowski wasn't just a quirky crime comedy about a laid-back bowler. It was a surreal cultural earthquake that redefined what a cult classic could be. Behind the haze of White Russians and bowling alleys, chaos brewed. Actors clashed with the Coen Brothers' meticulous direction, props went missing, and even the film's reception nearly doomed it. What audiences didn't see was the grit, tension, and absurdity behind the laughter. Today we're pulling back the rug, literally and figuratively, for 20 mind-blowing facts about the Big Lebowski that will make you see the film in a whole new light. And stick around, because the bonus fact is a revelation so strange that even the most die-hard fans will be stunned. Let's roll into it. Jeff Bridges refused to memorize his lines. Jeff Bridges didn't treat The Big Lebowski like a typical role. Instead of memorizing lines, he relied heavily on the script during filming. He asked the Coen brothers before each take, "Did the dude burn one on the way over?" If they said yes, he'd ruffle his hair, squint his eyes, and slump his posture to look authentically stoned. His method created a relaxed, improvised feel, even though he rarely deviated from the script. Bridges believed spontaneity defined the dude. Ironically, his refusal to over-rehearse gave the character a timeless believability. Audiences assumed he was playing himself, but in truth, it was calculated looseness, artificial chaos that captured the dude's zen-like haze perfectly. The F-bomb record that shocked critics. The film isn't just remembered for its surreal plot, but for its language. The Big Lebowski uses the F-word, or some variation, over 260 times. That averages nearly 3 per minute of screen time. Critics at the time accused it of vulgar excess, with some reviewers calling it lazy shock humor. But the Coens argued it reflected realism. The dude's world wasn't polished Hollywood, but gritty, unfiltered Los Angeles. Later, fans embraced the language as part of the film's rhythm, almost musical in its profanity. What critics missed was how the profanity became character texture. Without it, Walter Sobchak's volcanic meltdowns or the dude's muttered frustrations wouldn't hit with the same punch. John Goodman nearly quit over weight demands. Walter Sobchak's explosive personality wasn't Goodman's only challenge. The role demanded he maintain significant weight gain to embody the aggressive, ex-Vietnam vet bowler. Goodman, who was already battling weight fluctuation, clashed with the production over his health. At one point, he threatened to leave if they pushed him further. The Coens reassured him, reminding him the character's physical presence was central to Walter's intimidation factor. Goodman persevered, channeling his discomfort into Walter's tightly coiled rage. His sweat-drenched, red-faced outbursts felt real because they were born from genuine strain. It wasn't acting comfort. It was endurance. Walter became iconic, precisely because Goodman played him on the edge of exhaustion. The stranger's voice nearly didn't happen. Sam Elliott's smooth cowboy narration frames the film like a campfire story, but it almost didn't exist. The Coens originally debated cutting The Stranger altogether, fearing it interrupted the surreal pacing. Elliott himself doubted his voiceover fit, but once test audiences heard his drawl, narrating lines like, "Sometimes you eat the bar, and sometimes, well, he eats you," reactions shifted. The Stranger became the film's philosophical spine, grounding the absurd plot with mythic gravitas. Elliott later revealed he recorded the narration in one afternoon with little preparation. His hesitant performance ironically gave the film a timeless, wandering feel. Without that last-minute decision, The Big Lebowski would have lacked its dreamy, Western-inspired framework. The bowling balls were custom-made and stolen. The bowling alley scenes feel so natural, you'd think the props were everyday rentals. But in reality, every bowling ball used in the film was custom-made for the actors. Jeff Bridges' iridescent ball, Goodman's black brute, and even Donny's modest gear were designed to reflect character personalities. The production invested thousands into them. The problem? By the time shooting wrapped, most of the balls had vanished. Crew members and extras pocketed them as keepsakes. Today, those props are considered priceless collectibles. The Coens shrugged it off, laughing that the dude's stuff gets stolen, fitting, right? But what began as set dressing turned into black market Hollywood memorabilia, circulating in fan auctions for years. Donny's death was a practical joke on Steve Buscemi. Steve Buscemi's Donny barely speaks before being silenced permanently. The Coens intentionally killed him off early as an inside joke. Why? Because Buscemi's previous roles, like Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs, were famously motor-mouthed. They thought it would be funny to cast him as a quiet character, then kill him just as audiences expected him to explode with dialogue. Buscemi admitted he was frustrated at first. He wanted Donny to contribute more, but in hindsight, he recognized the irony. Donny's minimal presence makes his sudden death more impactful, shifting the film's tone from surreal comedy to sudden tragedy. It's a cruel gag at the actor's expense, but one that deepens the story's unpredictability, not chatter, but silence. Julianne Moore's accent was based on a real artist. Julianne Moore's character Maud is strange, aristocratic, and unforgettable, but that clipped, bizarre accent, it wasn't random. Moore modeled Maud's speech on a real avant-garde artist the Coens had met in New York's art scene. This eccentric figure spoke in deliberately strange cadences, almost as performance. Article Moore adopted it, creating a voice that felt both regal and alien. Critics initially thought her performance was over the top, but years later it celebrated as genius. By anchoring Maud's odd behavior in reality, Moore blurred the line between parody and homage. Her voice wasn't meant to mock, it was meant to reveal how deeply weird the 1990s art world could be. Not fake, but frighteningly authentic. The rug was replaced over and over again. It really tied the room together. The rug is central to the dude's motivation, but behind the scenes it was a logistical nightmare. Multiple identical rugs had to be custom woven because the film required them for different shots, soaked in drinks, trampled by actors, or destroyed in gags. Continuity became a constant problem. Stains, folds, or mismatched colors threatened scenes. The prop team worked overtime to keep the rug consistent, yet fans still point out small differences between versions. Ironically, this cheap prop became the movie's most iconic symbol, far outweighing its material cost. The dude's obsession mirrored the production's. A rug both worthless and priceless, not background, but centerpiece. The Nihilists' German band was real. The three Nihilists may have been comic relief, but their band Autobahn wasn't entirely fictional. The Coens created it as a parody of Kraftwerk and other German electronica acts, complete with an absurdly cheesy album cover. But here's the twist. The soundtrack actually included real tracks from a faux 80s synth group created for the movie. The production recorded authentic-sounding music to sell the gag. That means the Nihilists weren't just characters, they were musicians with a fictional history. Fans later pressed bootleg copies of Autobahn's music, treating it like a real band. A throwaway joke mutated into a cult artifact. Not parody alone, but parody that bled into reality. John Turturro begged for more Jesus scenes. John Turturro's Jesus Quintana steals every second of screen time, yet he appears for less than 5 minutes. Turturro loved the character so much he begged the Coens to expand his role. He even improvised the infamous ball-licking scene, adding sleaze beyond what was scripted. The Coens resisted padding the character, believing less was more. Still, Turturro was so obsessed that years later, he convinced them to let him direct a spin-off, The Jesus Rolls. The result? A divisive film fans either love or loathe. But the fact remains, Jesus was never supposed to become a cultural icon. He was meant as a grotesque cameo, not villain, but myth. The dream sequences were exhaustingly complex. The dude's psychedelic dream sequences look effortless, but behind the camera, they were grueling. The elaborate Busby Berkeley-style choreography, bowling pins, and floating costumes required weeks of planning. Jeff Bridges had to be strapped into a flying harness for hours, dangling painfully while cameras swirled around him. Costume designer Mary Zofris built surreal outfits, like Saddam Hussein as a bowling shoe clerk, with meticulous detail. The Coens demanded precision. Every spin, every glitter effect had to sync with Carter Burwell's music. Crew members later admitted those dream scenes consumed more energy than any other part of the shoot. What feels like a drug trip on screen was actually a disciplined, back-breaking ballet. Not spontaneous, but obsessively engineered. The Coens originally wanted Marlon Brando. It sounds impossible now, but the Coens initially flirted with the idea of casting Marlon Brando in a cameo. They envisioned him as a bizarre Hollywood recluse tied into the dude's odyssey. The idea collapsed when Brando's health declined in the late 1990s, and the Coens shifted focus to younger actors. While the cameo never materialized, it reveals how ambitious and strange their casting dreams were. Instead, they doubled down on eccentric character actors like John Turturro and David Thewlis. Brando, in The Big Lebowski, might have overshadowed the whole film. In the end, his absence preserved the balance, not dominated by a legend, but shared among a rogues gallery of oddballs. Philip Seymour Hoffman's nervous energy was real. As Brandt, the sycophantic assistant to the Big Lebowski, Philip Seymour Hoffman delivered nervous laughter and obsequious smiles, but here's the secret. That wasn't all acting. Hoffman later admitted he was genuinely intimidated by the Coen Brothers' clinical directing style. He struggled with whether he was getting it right and poured that anxiety into Brandt's twitchy mannerisms. On set, Hoffman would pace between takes, asking, "Do you need it smaller? Bigger?" The Coens encouraged him to lean into discomfort. It worked. Brandt became a masterclass in awkward tension. The performance endures because Hoffman wasn't hiding his nerves. He weaponized them. Not polished acting, but raw unease turned into art. Tara Reid's big break almost broke her. Before The Big Lebowski, Tara Reid was unknown. Playing Bunny Lebowski, the seductive young trophy wife, catapulted her career, but at a price. Reid revealed she felt exploited by Hollywood's fixation on her body after the infamous toe painting scene. Critics dismissed her as shallow, but the truth was harsher. She had been thrust into a role written as caricature. The Coens defended it as satire of L.A. superficiality, but Reid later admitted the role typecast her for years. Ironically, what was supposed to launch her career ended up boxing her in. Not liberation, but limitation. The role made her famous and trapped her. The bowling alley barely existed. The bowling alley, so central to the story, was almost an illusion. The Hollywood Star Lanes, where much of the film was shot, was a rundown real location scheduled for demolition. The production barely secured it before it closed. The crew had to patch it up, repaint lanes, and build extra neon to make it cinematic. By the time fans sought out the alley after the film's release, it was gone. Demolished in 2002, it now exists only in the movie and in memories of those who bowled there. What audiences see as timeless was already vanishing. Not eternal playground, but temporary ghost. The script was written before Fargo. Most people assume The Big Lebowski came after Fargo's success, but the Coens had actually written the script years earlier. They shelved it because the sprawling, surreal structure seemed too risky. Only after Fargo earned them Oscars did the studio finally give them the green light. By then, Los Angeles had changed, and the film captured an already fading 1990s counterculture. The delay worked in its favor. The dude became an accidental time capsule, a man out of step with both the Reagan 80s and the grunge 90s. Not delayed failure, but delayed perfection. Timing turned a shelved experiment into a cult legend. Jeff Bridges' wardrobe came from his closet. The dude's slouchy cardigans, jelly sandals, and pajama pants weren't designed in a costume shop. They came directly from Jeff Bridges' own wardrobe. Costume designer Mary Zofris asked him to bring in clothes he thought the character would wear. Bridges showed up with ratty shirts and threadbare sweaters, and the Coens loved it. Some pieces were so personal that Bridges still owns them today, including the infamous cardigan. Fans later began producing replicas, and the sweater became a fashion cult item. Ironically, the dude's anti-style became one of the most imitated looks of the late 90s. Not design, but lived-in reality stitched into film history. The film bombed at the box office. When The Big Lebowski premiered in 1998, it wasn't embraced. Critics were divided. Some called it incoherent, others accused it of being too indulgent. At the box office, it barely recouped its budget, a crushing disappointment after Fargo's acclaim. For years, the movie was considered a misfire, but then something strange happened. Midnight screenings, fan conventions, and bootleg VHS tapes resurrected it. By the mid-2000s, it was a cultural phenomenon. Lebowski Fest gatherings sprung up, with fans in bathrobes drinking White Russians. What failed in theaters became immortal on DVD, not flop, but Phoenix reborn from its own ashes. Saddam Hussein's cameo was controversial. One of the strangest dream sequence gags features Saddam Hussein as a bowling shoe clerk. The timing was provocative. In the late 1990s, Hussein was still in power and seen as America's enemy. The Coens risked backlash by including him, but they argued it underscored the absurdity of the dude's subconscious. Some critics accused the film of trivializing global politics, while others praised it as biting satire. The actor portraying Hussein, Jerry Haleva, was actually a political lobbyist who moonlighted as Saddam's lookalike. The surreal casting blurred reality with parody, reminding audiences that the dude's world was both ridiculous and frighteningly real. Not fantasy, but funhouse mirror. Walter's Vietnam rants were improvised. Walter Sobchak's furious Vietnam monologues weren't always scripted. John Goodman improvised much of his dialogue, riffing on real veterans' accounts he had read while preparing for the role. The Coens encouraged him to rant longer, knowing they could trim in editing. Goodman delivered volcanic eruptions, red-faced and trembling, as if he were actually reliving combat. Many of his improvised lines made the final cut, giving Walter an unhinged authenticity no script could replicate. Viewers laughed, but veterans later admitted his paranoia felt uncomfortably real. Walter wasn't just comic relief, he was tragedy masquerading as comedy. Not clown, but wounded soldier. The dude was based on a real person. Perhaps the wildest secret? Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski wasn't entirely fictional. The character was inspired by Jeff Dowd, a real-life figure in the 1970s Los Angeles film scene. Dowd was a counterculture activist, heavy drinker, and known for his slouchy charm. He helped the Coens get distribution for Blood Simple and became a friend. His stories, White Russians, bowling obsession, and anti-establishment rants, fed directly into the script. But Dowd wasn't thrilled at first. He worried the character mocked him. Over time, though, he embraced the legacy, even attending Lebowski Fest. What fans thought was absurd comedy was, in fact, reality. The dude abides because he was real all along. The Big Lebowski began as a misunderstood oddity, a stoner noir that baffled critics and flopped in theaters. Yet its chaos, accidents, and eccentricities forged a legacy unlike any other. What was once dismissed now thrives as a cult religion with its own philosophy, dudism, and global festivals. The Coens never planned for it to be myth, but myth it became. If you loved uncovering these secrets, hit like, subscribe, and share. And remember, life's complicated, but sometimes, like the dude, we just abide.